the rubric gets transformed from a tool used to grade an assignment or artifact to a tool that provides a roadmap for learning. This presentation will walk you through this evolution of rubric development. Here's an example of a rubric that I developed in 2005. At the time, it seemed like a really good rubric and several of us used it. And at the time, I was juggling two goals. I wanted to provide some guidance on what I was expecting that was qualifiable as good evidence, and I had to make sure when I added up the points that what I thought was good came out with a passing grade of 70, because we used number-based grading. Inadvertently, what ended up happening is that a student could work the grading math, have inaccuracies in the information, and still pass. The rubric also shifted the emphasis from quality to quantity with statements like 5 to 8 errors or inaccuracies, 1 to 4 errors or inaccuracies. So as I used it as a grading tool, a student may have scored 40 to 54 points, but look at the level of performance. Information contained inaccuracies. Classifying of facts may be missing and the text is not easily understood. Well, that's not really what I wanted from students, but if they played the math, they could get a 54 here, as long as they got 10 points for all the pictures and photographs and drawings, and they got 7, 8, or 9 points for the overall presentation being neat, attractive, and clearly written. Notice here, no more than 5 total grammatical or spelling errors. And if the title was creative and interesting and appropriate, they got 10 points for that. So a student could actually score in the mid-80s, but still not understand some of the content information that I was trying to provide. Here's a rubric that I wrote in 2013. A couple of major things have happened. First, the attempt to make a rubric that fit the grading scale has gone away, replaced by the terms unsatisfactory, basic, proficient, and distinguished. The point values are now aligned with the DOK levels. But a more significant change is the structure of the wording. If you follow the last set of boxes, what begins to emerge for the student is a learning progression. The first thing a student should master is being able to explain how the body knows self from non-self. Then it provides the next step, construct how the immune system would work to fight off a virus. Then it moves to being able to create an argument. This rubric can be pulled out during the learning to identify where the student is in the learning process. Ideally, it helps a student to self-assess. Notice that there's still a statement about quantity, but those statements appear in the basic and the unsatisfactory columns. Students can draw and identify parts. Students can categorize those parts into 3 main processes. And students should be able to see the relationships and cite evidence of these relationships. Here's where we are today. In this version of a rubric, you see a dramatic change from the point system trying to align with a grading system in the first rubric, and from a system that tries to categorize learning into groups like basic or unsatisfactory. Here the rubric visually displays the learning progression for learning the parts in the first 2 columns with pictures, to the next column that shows connections being made, and finally the last column which shows an extension of knowledge. You see a progression in learning appear that both the student and the teacher can reflect on. This rubric provides a learning pathway. It allows the student to see what's next in the learning progression. A couple of things that we have to acknowledge. In a purely competency-based system, where the goal is every student exhibiting learning and the next to the last column is the goal, you would report out competent and have proof of competency. In a system that straddles the competency system and the traditional grading systems, then translations have to occur. So while this rubric is the goal, during a time of transition, artifacts from past rubrics I presented have to exist. We designed this master rubric, or mother of all rubrics, when we were trying to capture what it meant to be competent. Not an easy task to have a blanket understanding for all grade levels and all subjects. We also have tried to capture all of the different ways of looking at rubrics and bringing them together in one place so that multiple users had entry points to understanding the master rubric. For example, we labeled the levels with numbers. This is familiar to people. It aligns with our DOK work. We provided words to describe the cognitive domains. We provided sample verbs. We added a section that clarified if the task or activity a student was working on was quantitative, then it was most likely only a level 1 or a level 2 type of cognitive demand. A change in thinking, though. Here, level 1 and level 2 are not unsatisfactory or basic. They are two states of the learning process. By removing the term unsatisfactory, we can praise success at level 1 and then look at what's next. This way of presenting the learning pathway is positive. We see that level 3 and 4 types learning are qualitative. They ask the learner to put things together to create knowledge, which means to solve problems and to demonstrate connections. Rubrics should be written positive in nature. We should put an emphasis on what the student can do and what level of understanding they have. Rubrics should not be written with a focus on what students can't do or haven't done. Now, I'm going to be right up front that I had a very hard time with this, which is pretty evident from the level 2 wording I used in the 2005 rubric. Information is missing and inaccurate. Major concepts of the system chosen are missing. A demonstration of an understanding of the system you have chosen is not evident. My thinking at the time was that I was trying to provide guidance on what they didn't know so that they could fix it or work on it. I kept tackling the philosophy of what rubrics were supposed to do. What I came to understand is that the way I'd written the statement didn't help a student. It didn't say what or how many systems were missing, just that they were missing. It also didn't help them to understand what they were doing right. As written, this statement shuts a student down. Now take a look at the 2013 rubric and looking at the level 2. Here the statement learning is stated in the positive. If the student has this checked or circled, this is what they can do. They can look at the next level to see what the next step is. This shift is positive and supports a student's emotional learning. In the last rubric, you also see a positive statement. So what changed for me was an understanding that, in my first example, I was trying to say what was wrong. But as I came to understand rubrics, I understood that we needed to help students understand where they were, and the way I constructed the rubric allowed them to look at the next level to see what was next, or to see what they didn't exhibit in their work or learning. A small shift, but as I've come to understand it, the shift is huge in that it fosters grit by reinforcing what the student does well and providing the student with guidance on what the next step is in the learning progression. And finally, it removes the stigma of not knowing, and learning starts with not knowing. All learning starts at level 1, and level 1 is not unsatisfactory. It's the first step. Here you see a rubric description from level 1. First, read the level 1 entry from the 2005 rubric. What worth of the student's work does it convey? How does it make the student feel? Now take a look at a rubric description from Level 1 of the last rubric that I showed you, the Next Gen rubric. What worth of the student's work does it convey? How does it make the student feel? So in closing, rubrics should demonstrate movement from one level to another and delineate a learning progression. The statements in our rubrics should reflect what learning at that level looks like, either in behavior or physically. Assignments or parts of a project should be linked to the different stages of learning that appear in the rubric. Level 1 and Level 2 may contain learning that's quantitative, and this is to say, if a student's being asked to memorize terms or vocabulary, those are Level 1 and Level 2 types of learning. Level 3 and Level 4 types of learning should contain things that are qualitative. For example, a classroom discussion is an activity of a way for a student to either practice or to demonstrate Level 3 types of learning. Let's end by taking a document that's very familiar to us, our learning pyramid, and lay over it concepts that have been presented in this slide set. When we're talking about that Level 1 or that first level on our rubric, we're talking about designing it so that the classroom activities that you would consider to be Level 1 allow a student to be able to master and demonstrate that they've actually accomplished this level of learning. Now notice here, there's no unsatisfactory, there's no negative connotation to this. It is the first step in learning. These activities help students to demonstrate, here's where I am. As we think about designing the learning progression, the things that we put and have students do that we consider to be Level 2 should be mirrored in the wording of that rubric, and so on for Level 3 and Level 4. Thank you.